When I bought my home, the very first thing that captured my heart was the giant oak tree that towered over the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just a tree, it was a monument. More than 2 centuries old, with branches that stretched like protective arms, it was older than the town itself. Local historians had photographs of it from the 1800s. Children carved memories into its roots decades ago, and the city even used it as a landmark when mapping the original roads. Everyone loved it. Well, almost everyone. The HOA had always been annoyed by it. According to them, the tree cast too much shade, dropped excessive leaves, and didn't match the neighborhood's uniform landscaping theme. Yes, they actually said that. And ever since a new HOA president, Gregory Huxley, was elected, things got worse. He hated anything he couldn't control, and my historic oak tree was the one thing standing in the way of his dream, replacing natural greenery with what he called a modern, minimalist neighborhood aesthetic. For months, Gregory sent emails claiming the tree was unsafe, even though 2 certified arborists inspected it and declared it perfectly healthy. He tried finding me, threatening removals, and even posted passive-aggressive newsletters about irresponsible homeowners who endanger the community. I ignored him because the law was on my side. Or so I thought. Then, one morning at 6:12 a.m., the sound that every homeowner dreads exploded through my bedroom window. Chainsaws. Dozens of them. I ran outside barefoot, still in pajamas, and what I saw felt like a punch to the chest. The HOA had surrounded my oak tree with cutting crews, cones, and a backhoe. Gregory stood proudly with a clipboard, shouting orders. "You can't do this." I yelled. "I have the permit. The tree is protected." Gregory barely looked at me. "We're removing a hazard," he said coldly. "Your appeals were denied." Before I could even call the police, the nearly 200-year-old oak tree crashed to the ground, shaking the earth beneath us. Neighbors gasped. Children cried. And I stood frozen, staring at the fallen giant that had been alive long before any of us were born. The HOA thought the nightmare ended there. They had no idea it was only beginning. The moment the tree hit the ground, something inside me changed. Shock turned into grief, and grief turned into fire. The HOA expected me to accept their decision and move on. But they had just destroyed a protected historical tree, one registered with the State Heritage Department, documented in municipal archives, and even featured in a local documentary about ancient landmarks. This wasn't just landscaping. This was a legal disaster waiting to explode. But the HOA didn't know that. While Gregory strutted around like he'd just conquered a kingdom, the cutting crew packed their equipment, visibly uncomfortable. Even they realized they might have crossed a serious line. Neighbors began gathering around me, offering condolences, shaking their heads angrily. "They can't just cut that," Mrs. Halden said, clutching her robe. "That tree was older than every house on this street combined. There's going to be consequences." I knew she was right, so I began gathering evidence. I photographed the damage, the stump, the crew, the trucks, even the HOA members standing nearby. I recorded witness statements, saved every email Gregory had ever sent me, and pulled up every document that proved the tree's protected status. By the afternoon, I had a binder 3 inches thick. But I wasn't stopping there. I immediately contacted the State Environmental Protection Office. When I mentioned the tree's registry number, the agent on the line fell silent before saying, "They did. What?" Apparently, cutting a protected historical tree wasn't just against HOA bylaws. It violated 3 state statutes, 2 environmental preservation codes, and carried mandatory penalties. And here's where things took a turn the HOA never saw coming. 2 years earlier, the state had updated its environmental penalties. Because of a series of illegal land developments, the fines for destroying protected natural landmarks had skyrocketed. The new maximum fine? $1 million. The HOA had unknowingly cut down $1 million tree. And guess who was liable? Not me, not the city. The HOA board members personally. When I realized this, the grief I felt turned into something new, a sense of justice rising. I knew exactly what I had to do next. Asterisk, by the next morning, word had spread across the entire neighborhood. People approached me during my walk to the mailbox, whispering about fines, lawsuits, and how Gregory completely lost his mind this time. Some neighbors who had always feared speaking against the HOA suddenly found courage, because this time the board hadn't just overstepped. They had detonated a legal bomb directly under their own feet. Still, I knew that anger alone wouldn't hold them accountable. I needed expertise. That's when I called someone who had never lost a preservation case in her entire career, my aunt, Attorney Marissa Dane. She's a feared environmental lawyer, someone state agencies often consult when drafting regulations. And when I told her what happened, she drove to my house within 3 hours. The moment she saw the stump, she froze. "This isn't just illegal," she said quietly. "This is catastrophic. They caused irreversible destruction of a registered historical organism. This is felony-level negligence." She asked for all my documents, and after reviewing them for only 20 minutes, she said the words I'd been waiting to hear: "You're going to win this easily." Together, we filed immediate complaints with the State Heritage Department, Environmental Protection Office, and the District Attorney's Environmental Crimes Division. The agencies responded shockingly fast because this wasn't an ordinary case. A protected historical landmark had been destroyed without authorization. A caseworker arrived the same day, took one look at the stump, and began photographing everything. "This is going to be bad for them," he said. "Very bad." Meanwhile, the HOA board desperately tried to control the narrative. They sent out an email claiming the tree was rotting, in danger of falling, and threatened community safety. They provided no proof, no arborist report, nothing. But their lies collapsed instantly when 2 neighbors posted their own videos on social media, videos showing the tree standing tall, stable, and healthy just 1 day before the crews arrived. By evening, the story of the destroyed $1 million tree had spread online, gaining thousands of views within hours. A local reporter even left a note on my door asking for an interview. The HOA had crossed a line they could not erase. And they were about to learn that when you destroy something priceless, it comes with a price they could never afford. The following week, the first official hearing was scheduled at the city's enforcement office. When I walked in with Aunt Marissa, the room fell silent. Gregory and the HOA board were already seated, looking shaken. This was no longer their territory. There were no HOA newsletters to hide behind, no intimidation tactics, no selective enforcement games. Here, the law, not their arrogance, held power. On the large screen behind the panel, the investigator displayed photo after photo: the healthy oak standing tall, the Heritage Registry listing, historical photographs dating back 120-plus years, and finally, the gut-wrenching image of the fallen trunk. The investigator read aloud the list of violations: destruction of a protected historical organism, unauthorized land alteration, violation of state preservation code, falsifying safety claims, and executing removal without licensed arborist evaluation. With every sentence, the board members shrank deeper into their chairs. But the real blow came when the investigator revealed the valuation report. Based on ecological impact, historical value, and documented age, the estimated financial value of the destroyed landmark is $1 million. Gasps erupted across the room. Gregory looked like the ground had opened beneath him. One board member actually whispered, "We're ruined." Then came the financial penalties: personal liability for all board members involved, mandatory restitution payments, environmental restoration fees, civil penalties under state preservation law, potential criminal negligence review pending DIA approval, and every signature authorizing the removal. Gregory's, he had single-handedly implicated the entire board. Then Marissa stood, calm, collected, terrifying in her precision. This homeowner begged you not to cut the tree. He provided evidence. You ignored certified arborists. You abused authority, lied to residents, and destroyed a protected landmark. This isn't a mistake. This is willful misconduct. No one dared respond. Not even Gregory. When the hearing ended, the HOA board members avoided eye contact as they left. Gregory, normally loud and smug, stayed silent, sweating, shaking, refusing to lift his head. Outside, neighbors approached me with supportive pats on the back. They finally got what they deserved, one said. But this wasn't victory yet. This was only the beginning. The DA review was still pending, and that decision could change everything. When the HOAS crew finally left, leaving behind splintered wood, crushed ferns, and a stump that looked like an open wound in the earth, I called the only person who could help me, Dr. Marlin HOA, a certified master arborist who had been studying historic trees for 30 years. When he arrived, he walked straight to the stump, knelt down, and ran his fingers along the exposed rings like he was reading a biography etched in wood. His eyebrows tightened. His jaw locked. Then he stood up and said words that changed everything. This wasn't just a tree. This was a documented heritage oak. He explained that the tree's growth pattern, trunk diameter, and core health confirmed it was over 2 centuries old, likely planted by early settlers. Even worse for the HOA, Dr. Hawley recognized markings from last year's environmental survey. The oak had been officially registered in the County Living Landmarks database, meaning cutting it down wasn't just reckless, it was illegal, carrying massive financial penalties. I asked the obvious question, so how much trouble are they in? He glanced at the now empty space in my yard and shook his head. Trouble? No, this is ruin. That tree was appraised at over $1 million between its historic value, environmental protections, and required replacement costs. $1 million. For a tree they cut because it slightly blocked the uniform view of the neighborhood. But Dr. Hawley wasn't finished. He documented the entire scene measurements, soil samples, stump rings, root spread, and photographs of the HOA crew's tire tracks. He even found the paper marker from last year's survey buried under a clump of dirt, proving the HOA knew the tree was protected and cut it anyway. When he handed me the report, he said, "Take this to the county, and brace yourself. They're not going to like what comes next." He was right. What came next wasn't just a fine. It was a full-scale reckoning. The following week started like any other until a county environmental investigator and 2 deputies showed up at the HOA office. I didn't have to imagine what happened inside. The entire board meeting was recorded by a resident live streaming from their balcony. The president, Greg, tried to bluff. He claimed the tree was diseased, dangerous, and approved for removal by a majority vote. But the investigator placed Dr. Hale's report on the table like a thunderbolt. The room fell silent. The county charged the HOA with willful destruction of a protected landmark, violation of historical preservation ordinances, illegal land disturbance, and failure to obtain removal permits. Each violation came with fines stacked together. The total penalties exceeded $1 million, all payable by the HOA, not by individual homeowners. But the worst part for them wasn't the money. It was the restitution order. They were legally required to fund a full ecological restoration, including planting 8 heritage-grade saplings, stabilizing the soil, and establishing a multi-year care plan monitored by environmental officers. The cost? Another couple $100,000. Greg's face turned ghost white when they told him. But justice wasn't done yet. Residents started turning against the board, furious that HOA dues might skyrocket to cover the fines. They demanded resignations. They demanded transparency. They demanded accountability. Greg tried to shift blame onto the landscapers. The landscapers presented signed orders from him. He tried to blame the compliance officer. She exposed emails where Greg pressured her to fast-track removal before anyone notices. The board collapsed overnight. Greg was removed, the vice president resigned. And by the next morning, half the neighborhood wanted a complete dissolution of the HOA. And through all of it, my yard sat quiet, a reminder of their arrogance and the price they now had to pay. The HOA thought they could bully me, cut down what wasn't theirs, and walk away. Instead, they sparked the downfall of their entire operation over a tree worth more than their entire annual budget. The fallout spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Overnight, group chats, Facebook threads, and porch conversations buzzed with anger, disbelief, and one repeated phrase: they cut down $1 million tree? For years, the HOA had ruled with iron-fisted arrogance, petty citations, selective enforcement, secret meetings, and threats disguised as community standards. But the destruction of the 200-year-old oak pushed everyone past their breaking point. At the next emergency meeting, more than 100 residents showed up, many for the first time. They weren't there for updates. They were there for blood. People lined the walls, some holding up printed photos of the fallen oak, others waving letters demanding impeachment. A few brought their kids, pointing to the stump on the projector screen as if showing them the death of a family pet. When the interim board tried to calm the room, residents refused to be silenced. One elderly woman stood up and said, "I moved here because of that tree. It was older than my grandparents." "You didn't just cut wood, you cut history." Another resident added, "And you want us to pay the fines?" Absolutely not. Dozens demanded a forensic audit of the HOA's finances, insisting the board had been mishandling funds long before the oak was destroyed. A group of homeowners formed a reform committee determined to dismantle the toxic culture the HOA had fostered for years. The outrage quickly turned into strategic action. Neighbors who never spoke to each other were now meeting nightly, sharing documents, filing complaints, and planning a full restructuring. People volunteered legal expertise, accounting experience, even investigative research skills. The HOA's remaining board members realized the truth. They weren't dealing with a single angry homeowner anymore. They were facing an entire neighborhood united by righteous fury. The home that once felt like a target on my back was suddenly surrounded by allies. People stopped me on walks, thanking me for exposing what the HOA did. Some even helped clean up the debris still scattered across my yard. Others brought seedlings. They said the old oak would grow again. What the HOA tried to destroy had instead brought the entire community together, and they weren't finished fighting. With the community now fully behind me, the next step was inevitable: filing a civil lawsuit against the HOA for property damage, historical destruction, environmental negligence, and emotional distress. My attorney told me this wasn't just a claim, it was a slam-dunk case, especially with Dr. Hale's report and the county's findings. The HOA's insurance company tried to negotiate early, hoping to avoid the embarrassment of a court trial. But they underestimated how deep this wound ran. They offered $40,000, barely enough to replace a fraction of what was lost. My attorney rejected it without hesitation. Court filings became public record, and the story spread fast. Local news stations ran segments titled "Historic Tree Illegally Destroyed by HOA," interviewing angry neighbors and environmental experts. The HOA's reputation tanked. Home values started dropping. Realtors began advising clients to avoid the neighborhood entirely. Under pressure, the HOA attempted one final defense. Reg, the ousted president, submitted an affidavit claiming he acted in the neighborhood's best interests and cut the tree to prevent potential danger. But that lie shattered instantly when the county released an official statement confirming the tree was healthy, reinforced by the environmental survey proving the HOA knew it was protected. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the HOA board's lawyers urged them to settle and settle big. And they did. The settlement covered full restoration of my property, replacement of the heritage tree with a certified descendant sapling, compensation for emotional distress, and reimbursement of all legal fees. But the biggest blow? A clause requiring the HOA to undergo complete board restructuring and mandatory state oversight for 5 years. It was the legal equivalent of putting the HOA in handcuffs. Residents cheered when the news broke. Some cried. Others hugged me, saying justice had finally arrived. The HOA had spent years intimidating homeowners, but now they were the ones forced into accountability, transparency, and strict regulation. The $1 million oak was gone, but what rose from its absence was something just as powerful, a neighborhood that refused to be bullied ever again. And the HOA, well, they were only beginning to feel the consequences. Once the lawsuit ended, the neighborhood shifted from anger to rebuilding. The fallen oak had left a wound, not just on my property, but on the identity of the entire community. People had walked their dogs beneath that tree, taken family photos there, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries in its shade. Its absence was painful, but it also motivated everyone to start fresh. The HOA, now legally forced into transparency, hired a certified environmental restoration company to clear the debris and prepare the ground for a heritage sapling. They didn't do it quietly. Every step had to be documented, approved by experts, and publicly posted for all residents to see. For the first time ever, the HOA couldn't hide anything behind closed doors. Neighbors came out to watch the restoration process, offering help and sharing stories about the oak. A few kids from the neighborhood made a small sign that read, "We'll grow again." They planted it beside the stump, and every day someone added a flower or a note. It became a symbol of community healing. On planting day, the environmental team lowered a young, healthy descendant of the original oak into the prepared soil. It wasn't as tall or as mighty, but it carried the same lineage, the same roots, the same story. The entire neighborhood gathered to watch. Cameras clicked, people clapped, and for a moment, everyone felt the power of renewal. The HOA board members, newly elected, humbled, and determined to fix what their predecessors ruined, stood beside us, not as enforcers, but as neighbors. The tension that once filled every meeting had dissolved into understanding and cooperation. For the first time since moving in, I felt completely at peace. The oak's legacy wasn't defined by the cut that ended its life. It was defined by the unity it created afterward. People who barely waved before now talked like old friends. Block parties returned. Kids played freely. The community was alive again and stronger than ever. And as I watered the new sapling that evening, I realized something. Sometimes destruction isn't the end. It's the beginning of something better than anyone expected. Even after the restoration and settlement, the state investigation into the HOA continued for months. The more auditors dug, the more they uncovered unauthorized expenditures, backdoor deals with contractors, misused reserve funds, and forged signatures on violation notices. It turned out the illegal cutting of my oak tree was only one piece of a much bigger pattern of abuse. One by one, former board members faced civil penalties, personal fines, and in 2 cases, criminal charges for fraud and document tampering. Greg, the ringleader who ordered the tree's destruction, became the cautionary tale of the town. What he thought would be a quick show of power turned into years of financial and legal consequences. The HOA was placed under mandatory state supervision. No rule could be passed, no fine could be issued, no contract could be signed without approval. Residents finally had a voice, one backed by legal authority. Meetings became open, fair, and transparent. Every financial transaction was posted online. Every decision required community approval. The transformation was so dramatic that a local news station returned to cover the HOA reform success story. They interviewed residents who spoke proudly about the changes, showing how a once feared HOA had become a community-run organization focused on protecting, not controlling homeowners. As for me, the settlement allowed me to upgrade my home, restore my yard, and install a protective barrier around the new oak sapling. I also set up a small plaque telling the story of the original tree and how its fall changed everything. Visitors often stopped to read it, some even leaving flowers or notes beneath the sapling. One evening, as the sun set behind the young tree, my neighbor said, "You didn't just save your yard. You saved this whole community." He was right. The HOA thought cutting down a 200-year-old oak would assert their authority. Instead, it exposed their corruption, united the whole neighborhood, and led to reforms that will protect homeowners for generations. And as the new tree grows taller each year, it stands as a living reminder that the truth always outlives the ones who try to bury it.